if you want to know the secrets of the universe, study the human body. My mentor, Rex, would say this to me often, and I can still hear his words echoing in my mind. I met Rex when I was 4. A surgeon, scientist, art collector, philosopher, mystic who spoke several languages, including Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. He was an expert in gematria and sacred geometry. And he could just quote from the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita, Shakespeare, Plato, Manly Hall, even Castaneda at will. And he had a constant stream of guests to study with him. And I felt so privileged to sit with him so often and consider him my mentor. Intrigued by Rex's promise and by my interest in the universal wisdom encoded in the human body, I dive into studying science like one studies sacred texts. And then when I'm 20, Rex develops Parkinson's disease. And he experiences a rapid deterioration of his motor function, and then the disease begins to affect his mind. He starts to forget things and starts to repeat himself, and sometimes he no longer makes sense. And just to watch one of the most incredible minds and people deteriorate like this feels heartbreaking. This person who I love and who spent so much time nurturing my intellect and making me feel like he was sent here just for me slips away. And by now, I'm in medical school. And I know this sort of thing does not need to happen. I know that there should be a way to prevent or reverse this type of illness. And I have to rebel against the dogma in medicine that says healing in the central nervous system is impossible. I know it's just wrong. But in addition to Western medicine, I was studying natural medicine, and none of the training I could bring to bear on his situation was helping. And I had a sense that there was a way to create a miracle, possibly by repatterning his physical body according to what I now call its pristine blueprint. But I just didn't know the solution yet. And so the irony is that although reductionist medicine has led to some progress, we are getting sicker. And we're, for the first time in modern history, dying sooner. The incidence of cancer and neurodegenerative diseases and autism are rising at alarming rates. And we have the highest incidence of obesity, depression, suicide, and both recreational and prescription drug-related deaths. Reductionist medicine is trying to affect changes in the whole being by modifying smaller and smaller and smaller components, like activating a gene or stimulating a particular receptor. But, the result? Most of the time, it's not reversing disease, and it's not leading to true healing. It's thought right now, 38% of us will develop cancer in our lifetime. That's more than 1 out of 3 of us in this room. And 10% over age 65 will develop Alzheimer's. These numbers are unacceptable, and I'm committed to changing this. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And how can we truly expect to, resolve disease and slow aging and enhance well-being if current science can't even answer fundamental questions about the human body? It can't even explain observable phenomena. Even the best of our quantum computers could never orchestrate the billions of chemical reactions happening in each of our 37 trillion cells in a coordinated manner every second. That's extraordinary, right? That's extraordinary. And it's not even being acknowledged because current science can't explain that. And current science can't even accurately explain where the energy needed to fuel all of those chemical reactions is coming from. So it is time for a radically new way to think about our health. It is time to look at our health in a greater context of our relationship to the life force that's animating us and connecting us all. It's time to look at what's patterning the physical body and the nature of reality. And just as Nassim has been able to unify physics by looking at the 99.9999% open space instead of the 0.0001% of physical matter we can measure, we can find solutions for our health, aging, and disease if we examine our relationship to the unified field. So, what is the unified field? It's been acknowledged by multiple cultures throughout history and spoken of in many ancient texts. It's been called Qi by the traditional Chinese, and Akasha in ancient Vedic texts, and Great Spirit by multiple indigenous cultures. And many people have contemplated what the field is, but great minds like Walter Russell and Nikola Tesla call the field the ether and describe it like an incredibly rarefied gas vibrating at almost infinite velocity. And I see the field as the unified sea of infinite energy and information we exist within and which exists within us. The field is simultaneously connected across all points, aspects, and dimensions with no regard to distance or time. The backdrop of the field is the ether, and everything emerges out of this. As the ether begins to slow down in gradation, we begin to see its manifestation. So imagine information as a wave arising out of the ether. The energy is the force that is moving the wave, and the wave is the information. And then the information waves start to interact, and where one information wave intersects another information wave, a plonk precipitates into existence. Our pixel size of our observable universe. And this has a much greater level of coherency and information exchange with the field. And then plonks interact with one another to form the proton. And this has a much higher level of organization and therefore greater information exchange with the field. And then the proton interacts with other subatomic phenomena that are emerging out of the field to form hydrogen, and then all the other atoms of the periodic table. So with each increase in complexity, there's a greater amount of information exchange with the field. So it's really important to highlight that these things are emerging out of the field. They're not distinct from the field, because nothing has ever or will ever exist apart from the field. Right. So now let's look at how our biology and all of life emerges out of the field. So at conception, when the sperm penetrates the egg, even current science agrees, there's a flash of light. It's like a dual toroid photoacoustic boom that informs the field life was created. And this leaves a very specific imprint in space memory. I like to call this the pristine blueprint of that being. So our pristine blueprint is influenced by our unique genetics, by our ancestral heritage, astrological influences, but most of all, by our soul. Maybe one day, instead of asking someone, what's your sign? Or where were you born? We're going to say, hey, what are your space memory coordinates? Because, not only were you conceived there, your pristine blueprint still resides there. And the pristine blueprint allows for space to become highly structured and coherent within a boundary condition. And this allows for high degrees of organization to emerge. This is what dictates the almost infinite complexity of the human body. It's like a series of vortices in the field that are interacting and precipitating your biology. Like imagine the ether like an invisible 3D printer. And that photoacoustic boom at conception, the instruction set is literally imprinted into the ether, and then your biology is printed from the infinite materials arising out of the ether. And then even though, we think of our physical bodies as these tangible physical objects, we are highly ephemeral. Children of the ether, as physicist Wilczek describes. And Nassim and many physicists describe that no physical form is static. In fact, matter is forming and annihilating trillions of times per second. We are literally flickering in and out of existence. And each time we reform, we're patterned by the blueprint. But the blueprint and the physical form have a bidirectional communication, like a continual conversation. And when that conversation is coherent, there's a perfect channeling of the life force energy needed to fuel our complex physiology and of the information to pattern our physical form and orchestrate those billions of chemical reactions happening in each of our trillions of cells every second. And when that communication gets thrown off, our physiology goes awry. So, everything, as we go through life, things happen to us. We get exposed to toxins. We develop infections. We have traumatic experiences. And each of these things has an energetic signature associated with them that contain information. And some information is in harmony with our information, and some is not. So as we go through life, we accumulate misinformation. And the misinformation creates dissonance in our system, almost like static on the radio. You can still hear the music, but it's just not clear. And then these chaotic, energetic signatures or misinformation get communicated back to the blueprint as distorting patterns that disrupt the translation of the blueprint on its way back. So you can say the misinformation starts to disrupt the fidelity of the blueprint's coding. Like you can think of it like an old movie projector, where light is passing through film and projecting an image. And the light's like the universal, the energy in the unified field, and the film is like the blueprint, and the image is like the body. And then imagine, people are holding that film and handling it day in, day out, and fingerprints start to accumulate. So then each day, as the light's passing through the film, the image is becoming less and less clear. And another example would be if you had a solar panel extracting energy from the sun and turning it into electricity. And then a cloud moves in and obscures the sun. The solar panel can't extract as much electricity, make as much electricity. So in this example, the solar panel is like the body, and the sun's like the infinite energy of the unified field, and the cloud is like the dissonant signature of a toxin. And so in life, these dissonant signatures lead to entropy, aging, breakdown, and disease. So what's the solution? Transmutation or removal of misinformation and restoration of the correct information, so that you can have the appropriate energy to fuel your physiology. So my life's work has really become developing practices and technologies to help people restore resonance with their blueprint. So from a life practice standpoint, we need a new take on age-old wisdom. We need to, do things that enhance resonance with the blueprint and avoid things that detract from that. So we need to be mindful of the food we eat, the purity and structure of the water we drink, our thoughts, our level of consciousness, and the quality of our environment. But to reverse disease, enhance longevity, we need to develop technologies to transmute misinformation. And the cool thing is this is happening now. Yay. So a lot of the technologies I'm currently using and that we are developing and studying have extraordinary impact on our biology. With applying these principles and the new technologies, we're able to create miracles predictably. And I'm seeing striking results in multiple conditions. I had a patient who was a whiskey distiller and violin composer. And he had suffered he has multi-infarct dementia, where he had suffered multiple small strokes that began to affect his cognitive function. And initially when he came in, his wife had to do 90% of the talking because he really wasn't very present or engaged. And he no longer was working and really couldn't do very much around the house. He wasn't playing music anymore. So to treat him, I removed dissonant signatures from his system and used a technology to facilitate healing in the brain. And when he came back 6 weeks later, it was like meeting him for the first time. And his wife felt like she had her person back. Yeah. Yeah. Really cool. Yeah, and after a second treatment, he and his wife are traveling around the world and are very, very happy. And on a mundane level, I've treated a lot of orthopedic conditions like bad knees and bad shoulders, things. And one of my patients, who happens to be one of our speakers, Marshall, who is a martial artist and a musician, as well as a writer of my favorite book, Cosmometry, and teacher, had gotten to where he could not move his arm at all past 90 degrees. And he couldn't move it at all without pain. So we did the same process and used the same technology. And by day 2, he had full range of motion back in his arm. And by day 14, he was nearly pain-free. I mean, it was so fast, it's almost unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. And I have another patient who did construction for a living, and he developed congestive heart failure and no longer had stamina for physical work. So I evaluated him and did basically same technique. Reconnected him with his Pristine Blueprint, removed dissonant signatures to do that, balanced his hormones, and then treated him with this technology. And 6 weeks later, he was back to building fences, hauling things around his property, and working again. In terms of treating Parkinson's disease like Rex had, the results have varied from neutral to rock star, and everything in between. And the technology we are currently developing is going to raise those odds for everyone. But for now, I will highlight one extraordinary example. Jonathan is a book editor living in a spiritual community. And his Parkinson's had developed to the point where he no longer had stamina for his work and could really only focus for about 2 hours a day. He had lost facial expressions, had trouble with his gait and fine motor skills, and had especially hard time in high stimuli environments like a dinner party or a meeting. And so to treat him, I diagnosed dental pathology and some hormonal imbalances and sent him to a biological dentist to have that taken care of and balance his hormones. And then we reconnected him with his Pristine Blueprint and used this technology to facilitate healing in his brain. And from the very first treatment, he's had extraordinary results. He has never again experienced a crash after high stimuli environments. The facial expressions have returned. He has great stamina for his work, and his communal housemates have realized he's not the introvert they thought he was and find him to be funny and engaging. It's changed his whole life. And he's had 4 treatments thus far and is serially improved. And I'll just conclude with one final example. I'll delve a little more deeply into this. Kalani was working with leaders of South Pacific countries to help people who had been disadvantaged by corporate interests. And it's believed he was exposed to some serious toxins at one trip because he went from being totally well to suddenly losing the ability to walk or even turn over in bed on his own. And he was diagnosed with something called chronic inflammatory demyelinating peripheral neuropathy. It was like MS, but of the peripheral nervous system. And how was his case being handled? Steroids, suppress inflammation. Was it working? No. He was bedbound and lost all functionality. And so when you come from the new paradigm, what can you do? Remove misinformation, transmute dissonant signatures, restore cellular oscillation, reconnect with the Pristine Blueprint, and use some of these coherent technologies to facilitate healing in the body. So specifically, we flushed fat-soluble toxins out of his body, and this restored the oscillation of his cell membranes. And this allowed him to get out of the wheelchair and start to walk, but with a wide-based gait, supported with a cane, and still couldn't use his hands, but he was happy. And most importantly, as this is when he really started to improve, we removed dissonant signatures and printed it in his system. We cleared the signatures of trauma, bacterial infections, toxins, and used the technology to facilitate healing in his system. Now, I had to do these steps separately, and in the future, these two steps are going to be combined into one with the new technology we're developing. So we've been doing in vitro and animal studies and are currently designing trials for a regulatory approval process with the FDA. So this device will be available to practitioners soon. That day, Kalani was able to walk up the stairs on his own. He was able to get out of bed in the dark and walk to the bathroom on his own. His hands were still. His tremor had disappeared. Kalani was elated. So I had an inkling something like this was possible 25 years ago when Rex was deteriorating from Parkinson's disease. It just took a while to clarify that understanding. It was actually like following a trail of clues that sometimes feel like they were placed on my path by Rex himself. Because sometimes as I was going through life and studying, I would know I was on the right track if the new information I was learning resonated with what he taught me as a child. That was like a plumb line of truth. And if I had had this understanding and these technologies back then, I could have saved him and learned so much more from him. But thankfully, I have felt his guidance, throughout my life through the ether. Thank you.